to thank again the Kent State University School of Communication Studies for supporting today's event. Now we're going to put it all in perspective. What's it all mean? What's next? And we're welcoming back to the stage some of the people who were presenters today. Lisa Zone is the Managing Director at Dixon Eaton. She has spent the past 15 years putting her skills to work in developing and executing integrated marketing communications programs for a wide range of business-to-business and consumer companies. Lisa offers expertise in branding and image campaigns, social media marketing, product launches, consumer and trade media relations, trade show management, and special events planning. Amanda Kleinhens is a social media strategist at IKEA. She's a PR Kent alumni who has used her skills to turn into an integrated marketer with experience in helping companies tell their stories and connect with key audiences and meet business goals. At IKEA, Amanda helps develop integrated programs that align directly with business objectives. She works on everything from corporate and governance to crisis communications to channel strategy to insights and analysis. Chris Baldwin, in the middle, is the founder of True Digital Communications. He has a background in public relations of nearly 20 years of professional experience. With his expertise and experience, he is guiding companies on their own digital marketing journeys. At True, Chris is part strategist, part implementer, part teacher, and part networker. Bill Sledzik, our moderator, joined Kent State faculty in 1992 after a 15-year career in public relations counseling. That career included 5 years as head of his own firm, Sledzik & Associates in Buffalo, New York, in service to such clients as General Motors, Uniroyal Tire, Century 21, and Waste Management of North America. Bill teaches a range of public relations courses at the undergraduate and graduate levels and created 2 of the courses in the online PR master's degree. He holds degrees from Ohio University's E.W. Scripps School of Journalism and State University of New York at Buffalo. Bill's research and creative interests lie primarily in social media. Bill, turn it over to you.
I got to get turned on here. That didn't come out right, sorry. And I come from, as Ron said, the party school of the nation, and had a friend who took the PR job at Ohio University about 15 years ago. And he called me and he said, Billy says, you're an alum of Ohio University. I want to talk to you about this party school brand we have here. Said, and how we can shake that. And I said, why would you want to do that? Embrace it, my friend. You can have a good education and a good time. I hope you all did that today. I'm on the committee officially, but I don't do that much work on it. The committee's just done incredible work today. I think we owe them a round of applause because super. The speakers tend to get all the accolades, and I know the kind of hard work that's gone on here now for 7 years in a row here, and continuing to put together really great programs. My job here is a little bit tough for 2 reasons. One, I am fast discovering that I am the lesser known Sledzik in social media in Northeast Ohio, which is really hard for me. Because, I was an early adopter here, but it was Chris who first got me on Facebook. Back when he said, you have an EDU address, you could do that. So I jumped in very early. And it's kind of been fun experience this thing with my colleagues, but my family and all of that. But I now have this task of trying to lead a panel for which I could not really prepare questions because we're going to talk about what we did today. So I didn't know what we were going to do today, so there was no way to put anything canned together. So I didn't do that. What I'm going to ask for the opening question of our panelists, and they could all each go on for an hour about it, I'm sure, but keep it tight, is if you could just grab the one nugget that you came away, I know you were all presenters, but you were also sitting here taking in an awful lot today, something that this conference you got today that you think is especially important that you would like to underscore for the folks here, and then maybe you all would like to talk about it and ask questions. So, Lisa, can we start with you?
the last name like Zone, I'm not used to going first. So I would say, you know, there were a lot of obviously really good nuggets today. I just sat in the last breakout panel with Chris, and he talked about some things that I talked about this morning. One of which is the idea of having a process or a checklist that you're following, particularly if you're having a hard time getting buy-in from your C-suite. Sometimes that takes away a little bit of the concern about what it is you're going to be doing, because they can kind of see the roadmap. So it's a little less daunting and a little less scary to them that you're recommending that your organization get involved with social. So this morning I talked about a process that you might want to follow if you're a B2B company. Chris and Tyler just talked this afternoon about a checklist that you can use as you're thinking about defining and developing your content. So the idea of having something tangible that is a process, I think, is one thing to take away. Certainly not the only thing, but one theme that kind of ran through a couple of the sessions.
Good one. I would tell you, don't ever follow Chief Oliver and Joe Simperman. Good luck. I think a key message that started this morning with Andrea and continued throughout the day was the importance of tone, and tone throughout our channels. I think that when you look at understanding, I think it's fascinating that social media has now hit the point where it's matured enough that we really are starting to look at the messages. I mean, it used to be, oh, what's Twitter? It's all headlines. Well, yeah, it is, but look at the tone of the message and where it's coming. Now, obviously starting off with Andrea, and where she started this with civility and understanding the motivations behind the individuals or organizations and how they are either bad-mouthing you or whatever, but then taking that messaging into where Danny took us in terms of looking at the tone and is it consistent and does it work? I mean, I think us as PR practitioners, it falls on us to be helping understand what is that tone and why does this fit or why doesn't it fit, or what type of backgrounding or research do we need to do so that we are ready to respond.
They're rolling up the sidewalks.
What's only the most important thing that you need to know is the 3 B's when you're going to present. That's so, anyways, I guess that's
Wait, can't hear you.
tone.
Hold on.
We'll have it back in 2 minutes. Sorry. Talk louder for now. Tone is really important. Here's my tone. No, the tone is very, very important. I think we, as much as anyone as communicators, we get caught up in what's the content, what's the visual, what's the brand consistency, etc. These are all important things, but ultimately, what's the tone of the audience we're communicating with? What's the right tone for the right situation? That is something that we are very, very skilled at doing, and that's something that we really need to rise ahead and do. Amanda?
I don't talk very loud. Goodness, I guess probably the thing that I took away from today is really just that it's okay to be a nerd. It's okay to look at numbers and to track and to ask questions and do research. In fact, it's pretty mandatory and pretty critical to the success of any program. So, you know, whether it's done intentionally and very, you know, with a lot of purpose, I guess I should say, or maybe it's just collecting some interesting information and using some more traditional informal types of production to make sure that you're on the right path, and using the right tone and following the right process. Ultimately, it all comes back to being able to measure the success of whatever you're doing, and that's really the reward. You know, you're kind of taking a look at the upfront research and kind of bookending it. So you have to make sure that you have a sound strategy going in, but you also have to make sure that it made sense and it actually got you results on the back end. Otherwise, you're just doing a tactic to do a tactic, and you're not really sure where it's headed, and you can't take those insights and send them back up to the top to make sure that you're that much more successful tomorrow. So I guess that was my big takeaway: is it's okay to be a nerd.
Okay, thank you. Did those go out too?
Yeah.
You're shouting. I don't hear very well, so I can never know what's going on. There was an overriding theme in a number of the presentations today, and it had to do. It really started with Andrea early, where we looked at responding to complaints to hostility, trying to stay away from trolls, and those types of things. But it moved through, and Danny talked about working in real time to
be able to manage these stories, anything that comes in that we have to be able to interact with. But the one thing that I didn't hear, and I wonder if I can get the panel to talk about this, it's one thing to empower your public relations firm, your agency, or someone on your staff to say, you have the go ahead, you respond, you do it, and then something really big hits the fan, like if you saw the case, if you happen to be in here, this is the case from Children's Hospital, where there's all kinds of legal issues. It's very sensitive. There's privacy issues, all kinds of things, and you're sitting there saying, "Whoa, your management wants to control the message. You have to be responding in real time on very sensitive issues." Can you speak to that at all as to how that may work with your clients or with the companies you've worked with, and how do they empower people to say it's okay to speak, even in touchy situations?
Okay, I guess how I will start is just having a plan in place, knowing who you're supposed to go to. It's just like anything with traditional crisis communications. It's not a crisis until it's a crisis, but if you don't have a plan to be able to follow, going back to the idea of process, then you're kind of at a loss, and you're not sure who's in charge, who should speak, who's trained, who's not trained. So it's really important to identify those potential scenarios up front, making sure that you've looked at all the positive and, of course, the negative, because I think a lot of times the focus is on negative, but there's a lot of positive that happens too that doesn't get responded to in real time either. But specifically looking at something like a crisis, and especially what we do within our agency setting is making sure that everybody is trained and we understand who's the point person, who's the lead, and we have those conversations with our clients immediately. We don't wait until a situation comes up to say, hey guys, who internally within your corporation would we need to tap into? Is that HR? Is that the VP of sales? Is that the CEO? Who's in charge and who's the spokesperson? It's the same situation for us as it is for crisis. And it's almost that much more imperative because it is such real time. You don't have a couple of minutes to think through what your process would be and make a bunch of phone calls. You have to know pretty immediately and have the right tools in place to task everybody with what they need to do to just get at it.
I would add to that as well, and I think what Amanda just said is right on in terms of looking from the company's perspective out. But I think that we've now reached the point, and Danny, from your discussion here today about citizen journalism, and really looking at the folks that are engaged, that are actually reporting the story beyond what our angle might be, and then also going back to Andrea in terms of who those bystanders are, what they're saying. So making sure that you're looking at the entire community. I mean, it used to be before social media, if we had an issue that affected a community, you wanted to really take a poll immediately to find out, okay, this community, who's for us, who's against us, what are the keynotes, what do we have to overcome, where don't we have a talking point, where do we? That's all part of your prep, but now all that can be done in the digital space and understanding how that might fold in there. So I think that becomes a very key component to this as well. Also, and Danny, a point that you just made in your presentation, and by show of hands, this was great. FTC, does anybody absolutely know what the FTC's opinion is on social media and when we're getting in the gray area?
Which year?
Exactly. Dino just said which year. That was a key point, and the fact that we, because of our profession, need to make sure that we do understand when we are getting on the wrong side of this, and need to be able to offer good, sound counsel to clients. Say, hey, guess what? You paid for that post. You need to say that. Or if you're working with an organization, et cetera. I mean, I think it's interesting today that Huffington Post, we were investigating this for our clients. You can buy those posts. You can buy their stories. Now, yes, they market there, but it changes, it gets so blurry in terms of where's the information coming from, and more importantly, what's the motivation.
I think another thing to think about is there's lots of audiences that your organization has. How many of you are here with public companies? A few. So obviously it's not just the FTC, it's the SEC to think about in that case. And I shared an example this morning in my session. You have to think about how your brand is being represented in the social media space. And sometimes it's a small crisis, but it's important. So we had a client whose board had asked them what challenges or risks they faced by not being involved in social media. So we did a social media audit and discovered that somebody was squatting on the company's name, completely not affiliated with the organization. We have no idea how he landed on that as a Twitter handle, but he was tweeting things that this company would never want associated with them. So what was happening is when investors or shareholders were looking up information about the company, this rogue Twitter account was showing up alongside these legitimate corporate announcements. So it was not a huge crisis necessarily, but that was something that was really critical for them to take care of right away, because they did not want people to be finding this rogue Twitter account that was sending out obscenities and swearing and saying really awful things. They didn't even know that account existed until we had done that audit, which is frightening to me. As a public company, you need to know what is being said about your company. So if nothing else, you've got to be doing monitoring and know what's out there to know what risks you face when something does arise. I totally agree with everything else that was said also in terms of social being an extension of whatever crisis plan you already have in place.
Thank you. We can take questions from you all. I have others, but there's only a limited amount of time here, so I don't want to cheat you all. And do we have mics? Okay, Professor Armour with the mic here. Where was that? Okay.
Get ready, she asked good questions.
Now, if you find out that a company or there's a rogue Twitter handle with your company name, is there any way to use copyright infringement to make them stop if it is the exact name of your company?
You have to talk to your attorney on that. I mean, I know that that is something that can be used. There's also a process you can follow to try to get rights to an account. So if you go through Twitter's process, you can go to Twitter's help page or follow their process to try to gain control of an account that should rightfully belong to you. But another thing to think about is reserving your company names across multiple social media channels now, even if you don't have any immediate plans to use them, so they're at least yours.
I would ask is there an attorney in the house? I know there is, but I don't want to put her on the spot. More questions? Everybody's thinking beer, aren't you? Well, I have one more. Because what I also heard today a lot of from the beginning to the end, and particularly focused on it between the chief and Councilman Simperman, was this idea of being authentic. What you see is what you get. And I think it was pretty clear for everybody who heard that that's the way they both operate. These are people that they seem to be absolutely authentic. How do we achieve that particularly in a corporate environment or a business environment where most people who came into this business, it was all under how to control the message, command and control. How do we get people to let go and loosen up? Any thoughts on that? Have you had to coach anyone on that? Or?
Yeah, I guess, in terms of what we were able to hear today, we had a really great example of two key influencers, two people who are social influencers because of their ability to be an opinion leader outside of social media. So I think, Billy, your point, that's a very specific situation, and it needs to be authentic. And I know there were a lot of tweets in the hashtag feed saying, this is great. Both of these people are just as genuine and fun and exciting in person as they are on their social channels. There's no difference there, and that's exactly how it should be. When it comes to being a brand, a corporation or nonprofit or any kind of a company or organization, it's just as important to be authentic, but it's also just as important, I know that Chris talked about this in the last session, to be consistent. So you have to be consistent on social media just like you would be across all of your other communication channels as a brand. And that stems from having a solid brand platform, understanding what you stand for, your missions and your values and your messaging, and finding a voice. And that voice needs to be carried throughout everything that you do, not just social media, but every touch point, any internal and external touch point. So I think to that point, we counsel our clients about that a lot, is to just make sure that there is some consistency and to really understand what the brand stands for, who the key audiences are, and how you're trying to reach them. So if that means you need to be a little bit more conservative and a little bit more technical in nature, that's fine. Or if you're able to kind of let loose a little bit more and it can be a little bit more fun and humorous, that's great too. But ultimately, it needs to align with your brand. Otherwise, there's a huge disconnect there. And I think that's where people then think that it's ingenuine or inauthentic.
I think to play off of what Amanda just said, you know, it's all about being true, and I say that not just because I work for True Digital, but when I say being true, it's open, it's honest, and I think we obviously, you know, usually, Bill, to your point, when you have those discussions with the C-suite, it's all about, well, here's where we want the discussion to go, here's where we have a good story to tell. I think you also have to be honest and say, well, where don't we have a good story, and where do we have I don't want to say weakness, but where ultimately isn't something that we're really prepared to talk about because it's not us. That's part of honesty. It's also part of saying, look, we're not the best source. I think that it's not only knowing when the ball is in this court, where you're going to take it, but it's also saying, look, we're not the best option here, or this isn't an area that we know really well. So it's trying to get a client, and oftentimes I've found, a company, and oftentimes I've found the stuff that keeps them up at night, it's not where they want to take it, it's where they don't want to take it, and having a discussion of, okay, that's fine. So let's discuss what happens if we do go in that direction, and let's talk about what the safety valve is, so to speak, in terms of where we take it. Oftentimes you can almost see the relief in their faces saying, oh, okay, so we can be honest and say that isn't us? Yeah, you can, because we can't be everything to all people. If you're a brand, you stand for something, that means you stand for something, but by standing for something, it means there are other things you don't stand for whatsoever, and you got to embrace that too.
I think those are all great points. The only thing I might add is, you know, a lot of companies have brand standards in terms of here's how big you can use the logo and here's what colors you should use. But there isn't always a lot around here's how you should talk about us. So I think thinking about how you can integrate the content piece into your brand standards is going to take away some of the questions in terms of how can you be authentic. And you can also look at the engagement of some of your posts to see which ones perform the best. And my guess is the ones that feel like they're coming from a person are going to perform better. How many of you have met someone in person that you've followed on Twitter, and when you met them in person, they were nothing like what you thought they were going to be? Right? Because some people are really great behind a keyboard, and when you meet them in person, they are like a piece of paper. I mean, they're not exciting at all to talk to. So you don't want to have that either for your personal brand, which I think is also really important, for all of you to think about how you're building your personal brand for business, but also how is your company. You want people to have a connection to your company, and if you don't have a voice and you're not authentic, they're not going to feel that connection to the company. They're not going to have that love for you and then become ambassadors for you in the social space.
Okay, and that's interesting you bring that up because there's two people I met at this conference who I have been connected to on social media, and that's both Danny and Andrea, our keynote speakers, and they're exactly what I expected them to be because they're both authentic people. That's kind of how I sense it, and it goes both ways.
Yes, they're not pieces of paper.
Actually, Bill, I disagree, Bill. I thought that Danny's Canadian. I was waiting to hear A, but who knew?
Yeah, the first thing I said to him at dinner last night is, I had no idea, and I think he finished the sentence that I wasn't Canadian. I said,
Danny just said you don't blog in Scottish.
How many students do we have in the room? Okay, now I'm going to count on you guys because one of the things we tell our students when we have a meeting like this and we have an esteemed panel or speakers, we say, come into the room prepared to ask great questions because one of the ways you make an impression on professionals who might one day give you an internship or a job is by asking really intelligent questions. And I can't tell you how many times the speakers that come up to me and they'd say, tell me about the one that was sitting right there. So students, help me. Who's got the best question out there? Watch them freeze. This is the reputation of Kent State's online. Oh, here we got one.
May not be the best one, but
Luke?
what's your best piece of advice for someone trying to break into the field?
The best piece of advice for someone trying to break into the field? Or?
Social media?
Yeah.
Well, so when I came to Kent and I graduated from Kent, I didn't get a degree in social media. I got a degree in PR. So I guess my best piece of advice is soak up as much knowledge as you can, ask a lot of really smart questions, and know that the communications field is continuing to emerge and converge. So even though a lot of you probably sitting here are maybe either PR or advertising majors, You know, when I was going through the PR sequence, I didn't touch advertising with the 10-foot pole. I didn't think I wanted anything to do with it, and I didn't understand it. And now I'm helping to run social media ad campaigns. And so now that's not social media, that's advertising 101 applied to social media. So I guess when you're looking at, you know, PR, marketing, and advertising, and all those different fields, you know, knowing that you're here in a specific discipline for a reason because you're passionate about it, you know, as you're obviously seeing unfold, there's a lot of different applications for what you're learning. So just be excited and be adventurous in terms of what you're willing to work through. And if you are offered an internship that has a component that has advertising in it, you've never done it before, I would say seize that, because it'll just help to grow your skill set and maybe uncover an area that you might not have known that you were interested in, but that might serve you really well.
Hey, and a big hand for Danny Brown. He is like Chief Oliver, he is a hugger. So, and I love huggers. They're my favorite kind of people. And okay, and I would have picked on him again if he'd stayed around here because he has so much to contribute. Other question?
Can I jump real quick? I think in terms of how you separate yourself, I would tell you first and foremost, personalize. And when I say personalize, LinkedIn. How many people just hit respond to LinkedIn that I want to connect with you, and how many people include a little note saying, hey, heard you at Youtoo, and I liked what you said here. Okay, suddenly we have a connection point. So think about yourself, think about your personal brand. My team knows this, you know, we get how many emails a day? When was the last time you got a card? I use snail mail a lot, and guess what? I know it works. It works with me too. So again, the more you can personalize your communications to really show, and then to Bill's point, if you have that opportunity in front of a professional to really sit down and tell the story, make sure you're ready to tell your story. So that when we walk away, we can say, hey, I learned something about her. She has experience here. She has a passion with this. Because you just don't know when you're going to be on stage. But personalize your communications. Don't just use a blanket approach.
I would also add, again, if you're thinking specific to social media, it's not enough to say, I know how to use Twitter. It's, I know how to use Twitter for business, or I followed this company and I think they do really great things, and this is one of the examples. What impresses me the most is when a student can connect how to use some of these platforms to how to impact a business. So now, again, recognizing that you guys are students and you probably don't have the strategic plan for the companies that you're applying to, if you can at least make some connections and make sure that whoever you're talking to understands that you can connect the dots between what you're doing on Twitter or Facebook and how it supports the business, that to me makes a student really stand out.
Amanda, one thing you touched on was the importance of metrics. So what I'm wondering is, you are always wanting to measure your impact. So when you're using these social tools, how do you go from deciphering the arbitrary information to those truly impactful nuggets?
That's an awesome, awesome question, because that is actually what happens a lot.
You get a t-shirt.
Yeah, it's an awesome question because there are a lot of hollow metrics or ghost metrics and things that are a little bit flashy because it's, you know, it's okay to be able to talk about how big your account got or how many retweets you got, but really it's twofold. So kind of starting from the top is, what are those business goals? What are you trying to achieve? Is it thought leadership? Are you looking for hiring and retention? Is it sales? And really trying to understand what those goals are and how that then is impacted by social support. So in that case then, you take a look at what some of those key performance indicators might be. So is that led by engagement? Is that led by click-throughs? You know, the traffic back to the website or things like that, and how does that work through conversion rates? So it gets a little bit tricky because it gets a little bit, you know, labyrinth-like because you're trying to navigate a few different tools and make a lot of different connection points on the back end. But ultimately, if the system is set up correctly, and if you have your social media measurement tools that are connected to a CRM system that's connected to marketing automation, and you have your Google Analytics in place, once you lock all of those tools there, then it's just seamless. Now you're able to get everything kind of flowing seamlessly, and you can start to see where some of those key goals are being met. So yeah, it's important to make sure that you have enough Facebook fans to sustain a community, but ultimately, what happens when they like your page and they don't come back because they don't find your content relevant? Well, no, that's maybe measured by your engagement rate and how frequently your posts are being promoted and they're getting a lot of reach. So you kind of have to define that per program, and it's really just per objective. Ultimately, though, it's kind of wrapped up in some of those. I think probably 3 is usually, the account growth, the engagement, and also your reach. That's been supported by a couple of other smaller metrics to help to get you there along the way. But at the end of the day, just because you have a big Facebook page doesn't mean that you're converting sales. So that's one of the things a lot of times we'll talk through with our companies we work for is, we know you want to build a big Facebook community, but we got to make sure that it's the right information, otherwise it's not going to go anywhere.
To touch on that as well, and great points, but one of the things that we've seen, everybody is obviously in pursuit of the big numbers. I was just at a conference and I heard a not-for-profit, it was actually a college, university, and they were talking about how they were out there trying to get the biggest possible community of alumni because that's where they raise money, etc. What they found, while yes, that big number was important, they started to look at who was liking their posts and who was liking the post and who was sharing the post. And what they found is the people that were liking and sharing it accounted for some ridiculous amount of money that had been given to the university, these individuals. So they then went and said, yeah, our base is this big, but this small core group likes and shares everything. We're already talking to this part of the group, but here's the group that they weren't even on our radar. We weren't asking them for funds. What they found out was that group was worth about $10 million to them in endowment. Who knew? And that's a small group, but that's where the analytics start to play into this and really analyzing and saying, okay, what's working and why is it working and how should we be engaging with them moving forward.
We have another question.
Going back to building your own personal brand on social media, as students we all know what not to do on social media. We know not to post pictures of bar hopping and alcohol and parties, but what are some tips for what should we do? Who should we follow? What kind of tone should we have as students trying to get into the business, and what should we be talking about?
Wow, Brittany, you just earned a t-shirt. What a great question.
Thanks, boss.
I actually just did a blog post on this last week or this week, I don't even remember, about kind of the 5 W's of building your personal social media brand for business. So answering the who, what, when, where, why, and filling out kind of a roadmap of really what are you trying to be, I think is really important at the outset. The point about not posting pictures about drinking, we talked about authenticity. So I think you're not posting a picture of you at a toga party, I don't even think they do toga parties anymore, but, bong a beer or something. Do you still bong beers? I don't even know. I'm old. No, I don't. But you still have to have a little bit of a personality, but obviously you're using discretion. In terms of who to follow, if there are companies you want to work at, or people that you generally think could be mentors to you, or you're genuinely interested in what they say, follow them, but then also look at who they're following or who they're interacting with, because chances are they're sort of vetting people for you. So if you see them talking a lot to a handful of people, you probably want to follow those same people that they're having conversations with, because they've been vetted already by somebody that you trust. That's obviously one way. There's lots of ways to build the following, but it's also not enough just to follow someone. You need to engage with them. If you want to be on my radar, as an example, you need to have a conversation with me, because it's hard sometimes to keep track of everybody who you're following or who's following you. And if you're trying to get a job and engage with someone, there have been many times when I have done an interview with an intern candidate that probably would have never come across my radar had they not started conversing with me through social media. So thinking about how you can use social to be authentic and create connections with people in a way that just sending a straight up LinkedIn request with no note to it is something to think about.
I would add on that too, and Professor Moore would be unhappy if I didn't say this, is that blog. Write a blog. Blogs are old-fashioned. People don't blog. I don't blog much anymore. I get that. But it's a place for you to showcase your interests, your writing ability, your thought processes, and everything else. And it's that home link that goes back. Who is this person? They're going to go check out your blog. And is Ben Brewer still here?
No.
Ben's gone. Ben asked me one day, hey, I'd like to get 2 students who really understand social media. And this was back in, I don't know, 2007 or 8. And I sent him 2 links to 2 blogs. And he ended up hiring both those people eventually. Not right away, but he hired them both. So, who's the next question?
Okay, earlier today we talked about.
What's that?
Okay, earlier today we talked about how millennials hate being sold to, especially on social media. So how do we integrate where we are on sites like Reddit and Tumblr, where those audiences definitely are, but absolutely don't want to be sold to?
I think the trick there is it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I think we talked about that even earlier too, is, identifying what your tone is and what messaging you want to bring. It's a lot more safe to be a little bit more buttoned up and conservative and technical, and to kind of break down those barriers a little bit and not be afraid to make fun of your audience, not be afraid to get rough and tough with them, and kind of being able to speak one-to-one on their level. It's scary, and it's a little bit of a risk because, the last thing you want to do is end up on Digiday's top 5 brands that did it wrong. So, it's something that needs to be well thought out, and it needs to have a nice plan behind it, but it's kind of one of those things where, with like a Vine, for instance, we talk about 6 seconds of video, and it seems so simple, but if anyone's ever made a Vine, it's anything but. And I think it's the same with this strategy. It seems like it could be very simple, but you really have to put a lot of thought behind how you become casual in nature and how you speak to that audience group, because it is a little bit different maybe, and it's a little bit more non-traditional, but ultimately the reward payoff can be really big if the content meets the need and they find value in what you're saying and they don't feel like you're selling to them.
There's a book, and I'm going to strip the name of the book, but the idea behind it is they don't call them millennials. The author is Stefan Pollack. He calls it the I generation, as in the iPhone. And he talks about how this is the first generation that if you want to sell to them, they are also the bouncer. They're the one that's going to either let you behind the velvet rope or not. He hits on some fantastic points about how to really connect with that group. And the key point with it all, which I guess brings us back full circle, it's all about authenticity. You've got to be real. You got to give me a reason why we should be having this conversation. And oh, by the way, you can be a brand that doesn't necessarily sell something, but stands for something good in the world and empowering. And your generation in particular really likes that. But again, it's, thank you. Disrupted, thank you. I appreciate it, Allison. The book is called Disrupted, and the subhead is something about iGeneration, as in an iPhone and iPad, and it's got some fantastic learnings and insights.
We probably have time for one more. We're getting near the end here. One last question. I see people up there.
They're just ready
One
to go
more.
through that.
I got to recognize this guy.
I'll be loud this everybody here, but we're here today to try to stay on top of things, and that's really important, obviously, to people that came. How do you guys go from now to maybe the next conference and try to stay on top of social media and what's happening next?
I'll be honest, I couldn't do it without my team. No, and seriously, it's my peers, my team members at True. It's talking to people like you, Chris, and finding out what's going on. There is so much going on, and I think going back to Lisa's point, you can't talk to everybody, but there's a certain group that I trust, and if they tell me it's hot and it's happening, it's hot and it's happening. Therefore, I'll check it out. I think I'm unfortunately now 43, so I'm no longer cool. Definitely not to my 14-year-old. And so I need to rely on others to tell me what's cool today and what I should be watching.
No, I follow that. I mean, the team is important. I mean, not one person can really grasp onto a trend because I think perception is reality, and everyone's going to read something a little bit differently and have a different vantage point. So one of the things that I had actually implemented with my team that seems to be working pretty well is we have status every week, and we'll kind of talk through the hot projects and things that are going on, and it's usually very business focused. How do we get this project done? What's the next thing on our plate we have to check off our task list? But I challenge them to bring sort of, we call it a social show and tell. So now every week, we know that we're reading a lot of articles, but maybe we just forget that we read something. It goes in one ear and one eye and out the other. And So we make sure that we spend at least 5 or 10 minutes all kind of going around and sharing and saying, what was the hottest thing that happened this week? What was the case study, the new tool, the new feature, the new channel? It could be anything, but that way we're all kind of helping each other stay educated. Hopefully it doesn't take too long for everybody. You know, you're already reading anyway, so let's just make sure we have a group discussion about it and keep the brainstorming going. So something that might be something to implement if it's
Definitely best practice.
Yeah.
I think Chris said it best in terms of identifying the group of people who influence you and knowing that you can get quality content from them and that they've probably vetted it in some way. I hope I'm on your list, Chris. No, I'm just kidding. But you know, to have a short list of people, maybe not a short list, but a list of people that you trust. I also use hashtags a lot because sometimes there's people that I don't follow that I should be. So, you know, following specific hashtags, B2B, for example, is something that I really focus a lot on. So if I follow that B2B hashtag, I'm going to find information that I probably wouldn't have found any other way. So, you know, you've got to find what makes sense for you. You also have to spend time on the channels. You cannot just read about them. You need to actually spend time on Twitter, whatever time of day works for you, but you've got to carve out time on Twitter or Facebook or whatever platforms you think are going to be most helpful for business, and get in and see what's being shared there. You can't just, I used this analogy earlier, it's something that someone shared with me a long time ago. The idea of learning how to use Twitter, and it's the difference between reading a book about swimming and then actually getting in a pool and swimming. Totally different experience once you actually get in the water. And I kind of feel like that's what Twitter's like. So really engaging in the platforms is where you're going to learn a lot and find the best information suited to you.
We're at the end. Thank you all for coming. I think, Ron, you have closing announcements or?
Thanks to all the panelists and thanks to all of our presenters today. 2 quick reminders. 1, fill out your evaluation forms, that's that yellow form, and drop it at the front desk. And the other one is the happy hour at the Kent State Hotel, or the Kent Hotel and Conference Center. That way, as quick as we can get down there. That's hosted by the Akron PRSA Young Professionals and Mentoring Groups, and there is directions in the lobby. There's also a special student wrap-up session called Making This Work For You Now. It's at 4 p.m. and that's also down at social. So have a good weekend. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next April.